peace. King of kings, we kneel before you, Father.
We do not want to oppress anyone. All we want is our God-given freedom to be human in the land of our birth.
Before you, Father, appealing, asking for peace in the rest of the country.
Our country is in a desperate situation.
We are asking for peace in the world. Our Father, we are asking for peace in the world.
Are you committed to total freedom at whatever cost? Yes!
Reveal yourself, reveal yourself. Reveal yourself, reveal yourself. Reveal yourself, reveal from heaven. Because we are directing to you.
Why must the cost be so high?
Rise and sun, sunrise and set, forever almighty. Your promise, our Father, set fear down, Lord, for I am with thee.
I have said times without number, I am opposed to all forms of violence.
I will strengthen thee, yet I will help thee.
We are not defying, we are obeying God. And we ought to obey God every day. My involvement stems not from political commitment, but from my Christian faith.
Reveal yourself, reveal yourself, reveal yourself, reveal yourself, reveal from heaven.
At 5 a.m. each morning, Desmond Tutu leaves the official residence of the Archbishop of Cape Town and begins his day with exercise and reflection. As a black person, Tutu lives illegally in this whites-only neighborhood. Since receiving the Nobel Peace Prize, Desmond Tutu has emerged as a leading spokesperson against the South African policy of legalized racial discrimination, apartheid. His role in the country is controversial.
I question his sincerity.
Bishop Tutu does not represent the black Christians of South Africa.
This leaflet is evidence of an orchestrated smear campaign against Archbishop Tutu.
I have never ceased to be amazed that when you condemn a particular socio-political and economic system as unjust, that you will be castigated for mixing religion with politics. Those who benefit from an unjust status quo do not want it disturbed.
He's very much in opposition with a lot of whites who thinks he's a meddler and sort of troublemaker. But he is quite convinced that the government policy and the way of living of the South Africans is wrong. And he will say that no matter where or no matter what.
The policy of South Africa is to deny over 80% of its population the right to vote in the principal elections, which determine how the country will be governed. Restricted by law from publicly protesting, increasing numbers express their frustration through violence. Tutu's relationship with those accused of violent acts puts him at odds with the government. In December 1988, Ashley Forbes and 13 other young men were convicted for a series of public bombings. Immediately after the convictions were handed down, supporters marched to St. George's Cathedral for what is considered by South African law to be an illegal gathering.
Into the cathedral.
Yes, okay.
Okay, would you come into the cathedral, please?
4 of the 14 youths have received suspended sentences. Because there was no loss of life, the remaining youths will be imprisoned from 5 to 15 years. From the government's point of view, Tutu's leadership of this rally on church property is evidence that Tutu supports terrorists and condones violence. From Tutu's point of view, this is part of his pastoral mission.
I would not describe myself as a pacifist. I say that I am a peace lover. I accept the Christian tradition that there may come occasions when violence, war, are justifiable, but as very, very last resorts.
While trying to proclaim a message of peaceful resistance, Tutu does not hesitate to recognize the young men who chose violence or their families who suffer from their actions.
The mothers of our heroes come up here. When I called up the mothers, that resounding ovation isn't just done as a symbolic thing. It's for real. It comes from the heart. And seeing them wear the colors of a band organization, it's a criminal offense that they were carrying out. But I mean, there is a proper kind of defiance that says there are many things that you can do to us, but there are others that you will not be able to do. You will not destroy our spirit. I think you would also want to see the 4 who received the suspended sentence. I'm not praising them. I mean, there are times when they are quite maddening in some of the things that they do. But I'm very proud of them. I really am proud. I mean, I'm proud of those young people. They've shown us up with their courage. I just want to say to our mothers here, in the history that we shall write of this country, the true history of South Africa, your names and the names of your sons will be written in letters of gold.
He's refused to dichotomize the spiritual from the political. In other words, he's refused to place God on the backbench of the parliament of life. He's involved God as God should be involved in every sphere of life.
God hasten the day when our brothers and sisters in exile will be able to return home. Hasten the day when the doors of the prisons will be opened, when our children, when our fathers, when our mothers, when our sisters, when our brothers will emerge and make that wonderful contribution which they will make for the good of this land. For God, you know that all we want is to be recognized for who we are, human beings of infinite worth, created in your image. Amen.
Outside the cathedral, Tutu lingers until the people leave. His presence discourages the local police from taking action against the crowd.
If you can get these people to disperse, because really I mean, they're just waiting.
Okay, already have the dogs on some people.
Yeah, just try and do that, yeah. Well, we just want to be around to ensure that the police do not take vigorous action.
Historically, Tutu is known for his ability to moderate conflicts. When government troops moved into Soweto and arrested children for boycotting their schools over the country's apartheid laws, Tutu rushed to the scene. While the police detained the children for several hours, Tutu appealed to the parents not to escalate the conflict.
I am asking you, Uti, be patient. I know you've been very patient up to now.
Tutu was a leading figure in the New Defiance campaign demonstrations, which took place just prior to the September 1989 presidential elections. When police used bullwhips to remove protesters, from a whites-only beach, Tutu appealed to the protesters to take the path of peaceful resistance.
Let us get back onto the buses in a disciplined and dignified way.
But Tutu's skills for mediating conflicts have not always been welcomed. He was barely able to stop a crowd in 1987 from attacking an alleged government collaborator. It was the burning to death of a woman in Duduza who was accused by her community of being a police informant that provoked Tutu to chastise his own people for their behavior.
When that woman was shown on television being burned to death, you know that it was shown right around the world. And the world is filled with people who support us, people who want us to be free. And when they saw that awful thing happen there, many of them said, if these people can still do things like this, maybe they are not yet ready for freedom. I will find it difficult. It is already difficult in this country to talk the truth. But if we use methods such as the ones that we saw in Duduza, then, my friends, I am going to collect my family and leave a country that I love very deeply.
The story of Desmond Tutu's rise to leadership begins in a barren black township in the western Transvaal. Born in 1931 to a schoolmaster father and an uneducated mother, Desmond and his family were denied opportunities for advancement because of the color of their skin.
I thought, this is how God has organized things. This is how it ought to be.
With the election of the Nationalist Party in 1948 and its apartheid platform, the separation of the races became not only the law of the land, but the culmination of what the Afrikaner believed was God's will for the country.
And we didn't see anything particularly odd about this discrimination. Again, didn't think it had sunk into my consciousness. But often when my father sent me into the town by a newspaper or something like this, I used to run the gauntlet of young Afrikaner white boys taunting me.
It was the presence of a white Anglican priest that triggered a new awareness in Desmond.
And on one occasion, I think I was about 7 or 8 years of age, I was standing on a balcony where my mother was working when someone in a flowing cassock swept past. And this was a white man, and he doffed his hat to my mother. I was taken quite aback that he should have done it to a black woman and an uneducated woman. I didn't know at the time, but later learned it was Trevor Huddleston.
Huddleston was forced by the South African authorities to leave in 1955 because of his opposition to the apartheid laws. Today, he is president of the anti-apartheid movement in London.
My first memory of Desmond is when he was about 13, and I had met him before. His father was a schoolmaster out at Krugersdorp, but it was then that he got very desperately ill and was in hospital for about 2 years on his back with TB.
For most of that time when Trevor Huddleston was around in Johannesburg, he used to come and visit me, and I have never forgotten that example of caring for a nonentity.
I can remember one Saturday afternoon going down to take him books to read, and the doctor said, "You better pray for this boy because he's going to die." And I remember telling the kids I'd brought with me in my car to see him that they better pray for him too.
Following the spiritual rule of the Brothers of the Community of Resurrection, Archbishop Tutu maintains a daily discipline of quiet, prayer, and sacrament.
He's influenced and was influenced by the Brothers of the Community of the Resurrection, which is a very Anglo-Catholic order from when he was very young. And they emphasize, I think, the tremendous need to make sure that you have good periods of quiet, of meditation, of silence. And the basis of his spirituality is his time alone with God. His daily Mass is something which he's very committed to, and that happens 365 days a year. He will make sure that he has a Mass each day. He spends a long time praying for other people, praying for his clergy by name.
I have been very fortunate in the people who have been my mentors, who remind you that you need to have moments in the day of withdrawal. I mean, you pay attention to God without sort of paying attention to Him throughout the day, like a mother who is aware of her baby, even when she is very busy, as it were somewhere in the back of her mind, she's always got some attention on her baby, and she can hear the baby turning and crying. And that is the kind of practicing the presence of God which one seeks to cultivate.
Bringing God's presence into the daily crises of the country is a challenge. The South African authorities have attempted over the years to prevent Desmond Tutu and other clergy from preaching at funerals.
We have gone into some very, very tight situations, some very traumatic situations. Politically, we didn't have the weapons for it. And 2-3 minutes before actually dealing with those situations, you could see that we were sitting around trying to wonder what's going to come. And somehow, because the Archbishop does not depend on himself, he depends on the spirituality, this relationship with God. He goes in and somehow something happens that brings the desired result.
It is in Russia where the ministers are told what to preach. It was in Nazi Germany where the people were told what to preach. And if we are told in this land what to preach, then who can doubt that when I said apartheid is as evil as communism and as Nazism, that I was not speaking the truth?
Many people become priests, I think, because of very noble ideas about being called by God. I had actually wanted to become a medical doctor and gained admission to the medical school in Johannesburg at the University of the Witwatersrand. But because we did not have money to pay for my fees, I looked for another option and became a teacher. And then when the government introduced Bantu education, which was discriminatory, inferior education for blacks, I felt I could not be part of this. But I had no other alternative, and so an easy option was going to theological college.
Desmond was ordained in 1960 and was responsible for several parishes. Later that year, he left South Africa with his growing family for further theological study in England.
Desmond is not one to waste time. He grabs every opportunity. I think he did that as a scholar, and he does that now. Desmond doesn't waste time.
Tutu returned to South Africa in 1976 as Dean of Johannesburg. The South Africa he encountered upon his return was about to explode. Because he was the first black person to be dean of an Anglican cathedral, many looked to him for black leadership. Circumstances forced him to be a voice for the people.
So when I went back to South Africa as Dean of Johannesburg, one just had to be involved to articulate the aspirations of our people, because I'd been given a position that blacks had not had before, a platform, and people began listening, and we didn't have many of our real leaders around, and I was a kind of leader by default.
We all long for the day when we can touch Nelson Mandela. With Tutu, you can touch him. Here we've got someone who we can touch.
He makes you to be hopeful. Each time he preaches, I think that my freedom is coming tomorrow. And I never just despair that I was expecting it last week. It didn't come when I listened to him, and nothing happened. But, you know, I always look forward to say, maybe this time tomorrow I'll be having my freedom.
We do not want to oppress anyone. All we want is our God-given freedom to be human in the land of our birth.
His theology, I would say, is basically an incarnational one. He does profoundly base everything he does on this understanding that by becoming enfleshed, God has given to every human being an infinite dignity. And that theological base is going to bring you into direct conflict with the ideology of apartheid, which denies it, in fact.
I have come more and more also to recognize the quite revolutionary implications of the scriptures. You know, when I say that the book the government should have banned long ago is the Bible, I do mean that, because, you know, when you come to tell people that God created you because he loves you, that is where you get your value. It's actually the only point that one tries to carry across to our people, that you matter to God. You matter so much to God that he gave for you his only son.
For Tutu, those who matter most are those who suffer for taking a stand against the government. When the South African government imposed a state of emergency in June 1986, local police were given broad powers to detain and imprison any person without charge. While over 35,000 people have been detained, only 1% have been brought to trial.
I remember during my third imprisonment, Bishop Tutu drove 600 kilometers and came to the place in the northern part of South Africa where I was being imprisoned and demanded to pray with me in the cell. Of course, as you would expect, he was chased away by the police and he could not meet me. In my case, Bishop Tutu came out very, very strongly during my fourth imprisonment. And the South African government is not happy with a man who takes a stand of solidarity with the oppressed people.
At an illegal rally in Cape Town for the families of those detained and imprisoned, Archbishop Tutu spoke to their value as human beings.
I have come today to say to you, I am very proud of our people. Now, there are some people who are treated like VIPs. I want to tell you that you are not just VIPs, you are VSPs. Now, a VSP means you are a very special person. I am a VSP. I am a VSP. Now, come on, everybody. I am a very special person. I think I'm a good stage prop. You know, God has made me to be representative of something for our people. It's a very great privilege.
Come on, let us say it as if we really meant it. Let's take this roof off. We will be free.
Yes, Jalali yes, yes, Jalali Port, yes, yes, Umawan, yes, yes, Dorafland, yes.
Looking over all of these people and listening to their singing freedom songs and the dancing, I just feel I belong in a tremendous movement. And it's a movement that is unstoppable. And it's good.
Drawing this picture while he was sitting listening to the speeches.
He says that's his daddy in there.
Yeah.
Have you seen this? This little boy was drawing a picture of prison cell with the bars and arms hanging out and a cry, help. And at the top he'd written, tomorrow is my daddy's birthday. My daddy is in prison for 6 years, but the struggle must go on.
How old are you?
7. Why should we worry? Why should we worry?
We got it made.
Yeah. For a 6-7-year-old to give expression to that kind of sentiment makes you feel good. It warms the cockles of your heart, whatever cockles may be. They certainly are warmed. And you know that no banning orders by the government, no imprisonments can ever erase that sense.
Tutu moves easily between a political rally and a social church function for senior citizens. The effects of the apartheid system upon the individual remains the focus of his message.
The real reason why we invited you to come here is to say thank you to you, because you carry out one of the most important, if not the most important work in the church. You pray for us. And when sometimes people see Archbishop Tutu on television and, well, I don't know, what they say. Some of them don't say things that you cannot publish. You'd get arrested if you publish the things that they say. But others say, yeah, hey, man, he's all right, man. I think you can count them on the fingers of one hand, those who say, hey, it's all right. It is because of you. It is because of your faithfulness in prayer. And I really do mean that. And I want to say to you, thank you very much. These are some tremendously important people for me. They have tended to feel marginalized. And it wasn't just for show when I said to them, you are important people. Now here we've got just a few more steps, and then it'll be over. Right? As big war, nah. At heart, I am a pastor. And I'm a pastor not of black people only. I'm a pastor of all people. There we are. Lovely. Hello.
Like his own religious mentors before him, Tutu's relationship with children focuses on their individual value, regardless of the circumstances of apartheid.
What are we doing? Hello, 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 everybody. Hello, 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 hello. What is the game? I'm number 13. But I, again, perhaps as an African, have a bit of volatility. And we are exuberant people. And a party must be a party.
Sing Father Abraham. You all know Father Abraham.
Come on, stand up. We were seeming to be somewhat solemn, sitting in rows and almost like in church, where people think that somehow holiness and glumness must be related.
Don't be too holy. It's bad on a Saturday. You all know it. You all know Father Abraham, right? Yes.
We wanted fun, and so we had fun.
The major turning point in Desmond Tutu's rise to international prominence was being named Nobel Peace Prize winner.
In honoring me, it is honoring millions of those who are victims of a vicious system.
By awarding the Peace Prize to Desmond Tutu, the Nobel Committee acknowledged apartheid as an issue which deserved worldwide attention. The prize also placed Tutu on the international stage, where his actions now receive instant media coverage. At his installment as Bishop of Johannesburg in 1986, Tutu gave the South African government an ultimatum.
I give notice that even 18 to 24 months from today, February the 3rd, apartheid has not been dismantled or is not being actively dismantled, then for the first time, I will myself call for punitive economic sanctions, whatever the legal consequences may be for doing so.
Tutu has focused his campaign for sanctions on the West by trying to persuade government leaders and influential persons to pressure South Africa through economic means.
Here are the strategies which we believe are likely to bring about that change non-violently. And as long as you suggest methods that everybody knows don't stand a snowball's chance of success, snowball's chance in hell, that's okay. Then we say, how about sanctions? You have never seen such an upsurge of altruism. Everybody, but just everybody. I'm so sorry for blacks.
Sanctions is an absolute disaster for the black people in South Africa.
20 million black people are going to suffer. They are the first that's going to suffer. Not the last, they're going to be the first.
I don't want sanctions. nobody in their right mind wants sanctions. But you do ask, why is it possible that at the drop of a hat, they can be applied to Nicaragua, to Panama, to Libya, to Poland, and no discussion by all these people about whether they will be effective, whether you're hurting the ones you want to help most of all. But as soon as the South African issue comes in, you get this wonderful sophistry. And so white people tell us that they know what is good for us. Well, I mean, it hurts a little bit.
Tutu's international campaign for sanctions places him in direct opposition to the government. In February 1988, he was arrested along with other church leaders, but quickly released. He was arrested again and detained for several hours during the 1989 Defiance campaign demonstrations against apartheid.
This gathering is prohibited by the minister. Could you please turn off that camera? Turn off that camera, please. Right now.
The government of South Africa certainly perceived Desmond and all leading churchmen as a very considerable threat. And they perceive it because, of course, the church is a worldwide organization.
And I think the government is so scared of the consequences if the Anglican Church, whose headquarters is in Britain, who were to stand up and call for sanctions against South Africa if they detain Bishop Tutu. But it should be very, very important to note that Bishop Tutu has not escaped other forms of suffering.
The propaganda system in this country has really gone to town on Desmond. They have done one hell of a job in discrediting him in the eyes of white people who gain most of their information about Desmond Tutu from television and from newspapers.
Lavinia Brown, secretary to the Archbishop, often comes across the result of the propaganda campaign in the Daily Mail.
This card that came in the mail is a picture of a limpet mine with blood spatters behind it. It's a kind of bomb that goes off regularly. On here they're saying that Tutu praises the Soviets and equate him with Mikhail Gorbachev. Of course, the government's enemy, number one, is the communists, and so they are putting the Archbishop in the same package with the communists. They photographed the Archbishop as extremely angry. They've snapped that at some time and put the two together with an unfortunate bomb victim. The whole impression is that the Archbishop is in favor of violence.
And they say the most outrageous things, and you cannot defend yourself because how? You do not want to sink to that level, and yet, and also you see that by law, you cannot print a pamphlet without saying where it comes from. And yet those pamphlets are printed and you don't see who printed it and where it comes from. There's a name that's signed and no one can trace that person.
I find it excruciatingly painful to be regarded by many white South Africans as the ogre that they obviously think I am.
I think if you look at the way the government has treated Desmond in the past, particularly before he received the Nobel Peace Prize, and as they treat his family, and as they encourage white Christians to see in him a figure of evil, an embodiment of communism, however you embody communism nowadays, you can see the extent to which they'll go. They will do everything to denigrate Desmond, as they have done with Nelson Mandela.
The movements of Tutu have been monitored by local authorities over the years. At the memorial service for his late mother, local police were present. After the service, family and friends traveled to the cemetery for the unveiling of her tombstone. At the entrance to the cemetery, anti-Tutu posters were hung as local police stood watching.
When we had the unveiling of my mother's tombstone and we were driving to the graveyard, seeing police around, and then at the entrance to the cemetery, having those posters which I knew were not exactly designed to say they were from my fans, to involve themselves in what is essentially a family occasion when we were seeking to honor my mother. They should have known that these are things that decent people don't do. I sometimes wish that they could sit in on these things that they are supposed to be monitoring and just enjoy what is happening there. And maybe they would get converted and become a little more human.
He's far less likely to get angry about attacks on him than he is about attacks on his family.
I sometimes get very angry. I do. I get very, very angry.
The attacks on Tutu's family mostly focus on his son, Trevor. In 1985, Trevor Tutu was arrested for criticizing the local authorities during the trials of school children, arrested for boycotting school.
What are they in charge? There is no charge.
He was held in detention at a maximum security facility. He was released 2 weeks later without charge.
I get very angry when, say, my children intercept a call that threatens to kill me, and you get a death threat or something like this, and my children stiffen.
If you were to understand the level of hatred that exists for him amongst white South Africans, you would understand why we worry about him.
The criticism of Desmond Tutu is not confined to the white community. He has also been a target from within the black community. He is attacked by those blacks who have placed their trust in the South African government to reform the system of apartheid.
You wonder sometimes if people like Bishop Desmond Tutu, for instance, goes abroad and go and canvass for sanctions, of which he knows personally he won't be affected by the sanctions because he's a bishop of a church, a Christian. He knows that his Christians will give him money, or he can get money from the American people, of which to give them all the support. Now what about the poor people who is just, his livelihood is to work, look after his family, and live a decent Christian life?
I have a problem again with some of my colleagues who are inverted commas ministers of the gospel, who say in one breath that there should be sanctions against South Africa, and then again my dear friend Bishop Desmond Tutu traveled the United States east to west collecting money for his church. Why? That to me is blatant hypocrisy.
He is also criticized by those in the liberation movement who believe the apartheid system cannot reform itself.
I would like to see Bishop Tutu and the church in South Africa take a more dynamic stand on the question of sanctions, a more direct and prophetic stance on isolating South Africa. We would like to close down South Africa's embassies and consulates all over the world, and church leaders should really take the front line here. Whom does the South African government represent? It's an illegitimate regime. It does not have the right to put up an embassy in Washington, D.C., and in Bonn, and in London, and in Tokyo. We've not elected them. So the church must lead in this direction.
He is criticized for not consulting sufficiently, for not always towing the party line.
In order to prophesy relevantly, we need to consult with people throughout. So it is important, I think, Bishop Tutu should consult more now than he's ever done in the past.
I hold to the position of saying I would never be involved in a party political way, and that my involvement stems not from political commitment, but from my Christian faith. If it were not for the black community, particularly in South Africa, affirming me, upholding me, and loving me, I would wilt. I would collapse. I know that. I mean, I would collapse without being sustained by the belonging in this tremendous family. Everything about a Christian is corporate, and that I am upheld. I really am upheld by the love and the prayers and the caring of so many people around the world. My greatest hope is one that sustains all of us, that this country is going to be free, and that one day we will look back on all that has happened and wonder why we were so stupid for so long, why we were so crazy for so long. My greatest fear would be that the young people will say, we have listened to you, Bishop Tutu, Alan Busak, and all of these others who try to commend the non-violent route. We've listened to you long enough. We are not going to take it any longer to have our dignity rubbed in the dust as much as it is being done now. And we decide that the only language these people understand is the language of violence. And then we will have the conflagration.
When we come on, you're gonna see the gangsters, the tough boys. They make me laugh when they treat him like the devil, my father or Mandela. Because when they see us, they will realize they ain't seen nothing yet.
Archbishop Tutu is not a radical. My God, if whites cannot live with Archbishop Tutu, then I say, God help us all.
The timetable is always difficult to say when liberation is going to happen. When I was slightly younger, I was more rash. And now that I have grown slightly more decrepit, I want to say that there is no doubt at all that it is going to happen. That is a certainty. But of the time and the hour, no one knows except God. But I believe it is going to happen in my lifetime.
As the newly elected government of F.W. de Klerk took office, Archbishop Tutu called for a massive demonstration to protest pre-election police brutality in which 23 people died. Government authorities permitted for the first time in recent history an anti-apartheid demonstration to take place. Archbishop Tutu led the marchers through the streets of Cape Town. He addressed the protesters with a chant that promised to push the government to more drastic concessions.
Our march to freedom is unstoppable.
Our struggle must succeed. Our struggle will succeed.
The struggle for justice continues in South Africa. For Archbishop Tutu, victory is certain.
King of Kings, before you, Father, appealing, asking for peace in the rest of the country. Lord of Lords, before you, Father, appealing, asking for peace in the rest of the country. Our Father, Our Father, we are asking for peace in the world. Our Father, we are asking for peace in the world. Our Father, we are asking for peace in the world. Our Father, we are asking for peace in the world. Reveal yourself, reveal yourself. Reveal yourself, reveal yourself. Reveal yourself, reveal from heaven. Because we are directing to you, Almighty. We are directing to you, forever Almighty. The sun rise and set, rise and set, rise and set, sun rise and set, forever